A remote-operated submersible descends into darkness off the coast of Guadalcanal. Its floodlights cut through the green-hued twilight of the deep, illuminating drifting particles. At about 40 meters beneath a massive shadow materializes. The camera reveals twisted metal and scattered crates on the seafloor, the ghostly remains of a ship. An upside-down bow section lies half buried in sand, hull plates gaping open. This is all that is left of the USS Serpens, a World War II ammunition ship that met a sudden, violent end and vanished beneath these waters in 1945. For decades, the wreck lay undisturbed in the silence of iron-bottom sound. Now the submersible's sonar pings echo in the cold deep, probing the shattered hulk and stirring up memories long sunken. The story of the Serpens begins in 1943, in the midst of a global war. Built in a California shipyard in a matter of weeks, the vessel was a humble Liberty-class cargo ship, 442 feet long and 14,250 tons in. Originally launched as SS Benjamin Ann Cardozo, she was soon acquired by the U.S. Navy and renamed USS Serpens, AK-97. After uniquely, the ship was manned by a U.S. Coast Guard crew serving under Navy command. With 19 officers and 188 enlisted men, Serpens was outfitted for the dangerous duty of wartime supply. 5-gun and other anti-aircraft weapons bristled on deck for, though she was no warship. Her mission was to carry the lifeblood of the fight, beans, bullets, and fuel, across the Pacific. In mid-1943, Serpens sailed from California to the South Pacific, ferrying supplies to far-flung Allied bases. She steamed between ports like New Caledonia, Tonga, Bora Bora, and Guadalcanal, delivering everything from trucks to tin. By late 1944, as the war pressed westward, the ship's role shifted to hauling ammunition. In Wellington, New Zealand, several of Serpens' holds were refitted as armories for. By January 1945, she was packed to the gills with explosives and on her way back to the combat zone. In the last days of January 1945, Guadalcanal was a relatively quiet staging area, far behind the front lines. The major battles for that island had ended 2 years earlier. Now, Allied forces used its harbors to regroup and resupply for new offensives further north, and the Serpens arrived carrying a lethal cargo bound for U.S. bases in there. On the night of January 29, 1945, she lay anchored about a mile off Lunga Point, on Guadalcanal's north. A bright moon hung in the tropical sky, its silver light dancing on gentle. Aboard the ship, it was anything but tranquil. Her crew, joined by Army stevedores, worked late into the night handling volatile depth charges and bombs, carefully loading them into the Serpens was essentially a floating powder keg that night. Over 600 tons of ammunition and high explosives sat in her. This included 3,399 unfused bombs, each packed with 350 pounds of Torpex high explosive, along with dozens of Navy depth charges and other. Every man knew a single spark or dropped charge could spell disaster. Still, they had a job to do, and they toiled methodically, bathed in the glow of work lights, sweating in the humid night air. Unknown to those on board, small decisions and fate itself were counting down to catastrophe. Just before midnight, Serpens' commanding officer, Lieutenant Commander Perry Stinson, and a handful of crew had gone ashore for routine administrative. In all, 8 men, 1 officer and 7 sailors were off the ship, enjoying a brief reprieve on deck and below. Nearly 250 others remained at their stations. Around 11:18 p.m., as crates of depth charges were being maneuvered in the hold, disaster struck. Without warning, the night was shattered by a sudden, blinding flash. The Serpens erupted in a colossal explosion. Eyewitnesses later recalled seeing 2 distinct bursts in quick succession, a smaller blast, then a second, monstrous detonation that sent a fireball shooting into the entire anchorage was illuminated in an instant by the searing glow. A thunderous boom rolled across Lunga Point, followed by a shockwave that knocked men on shore off their feet. The blast was so powerful that it rained metal fragments and debris onto Guadalcanal over a mile. A U.S. Army soldier standing on the beach was struck by a chunk of shrapnel and killed. Coconut palms on the nearby coast quivered from the concussion. For a moment, observers were stunned, ears ringing. Night turned to day by the flash. When the smoke and flame began to clear, they looked back toward the harbor, and where the Serpens had been, there was nothing. The 441-foot ship had virtually disintegrated in the. Shocked onlookers reported that the Serpens had vanished. All that remained was her bow section, eerily jutting out of the water keel. In the blink of an eye, the vessel was atomized into countless pieces. The forward part of the hull, somehow blown clear and relatively intact, bobbed for a few moments. Two dazed sailors clung to that floating fragment of the bow, miraculously alive. Then, before rescue craft could reach it, the sundered bow of USS Serpens rolled and slipped beneath the waves, leaving nothing but a widening slick of oil and debris on the moonlit. Chaos reigned in the moments after the blast. Nearby boats and ships that had been rocked by the explosion now raced toward the site, their crews desperate to help. But as they arrived, a gut-wrenching scene unfolded in their searchlights. There was no ship to save, no survivors struggling in the water, only wreckage and death. A Coast Guardsman approaching the area described the water as carpeted with debris, splintered wood, torn life jackets, cargo dunnage, and unrecognizable fragments of the ship bobbing amid the choppy. The force of the blast had killed or stunned marine life. Scores of dead fish floated on the surface alongside pieces of hull plating. A pungent smell of explosives, fuel, and burned metal hung in the. Rescuers searched desperately for survivors, but there were few cries in the dark. Everything was eerily quiet now, except for the lapping of water and crackle of a few fires on the flotsam. In the end, the crews only managed to pull two men from the harbor alive, the two Coast Guardsmen who had been in a forward compartment and somehow survived the cataclysm by sheer. Those two sailors, Seaman First Class Kelsey Kemp and George Kennedy, had been sleeping in the ship's bosun's locker, nestled in the. That forward section acted as a haven while the rest of Serpens disintegrated around them. Battered and wounded, Kemp and Kennedy clawed their way out of the wreckage as the bow section floated briefly. In the darkness, they managed to grab a pair of floating water lanterns and ignited them, using the small red lights to signal there. This quick thinking saved their lives. A nearby base commander's boat spotted the bobbing lights on the water and diverted to investigate, finding the two survivors clinging to. Aside from these men, virtually no one else escaped. Out of nearly 250 souls on board, only Kemp and Kennedy. All others were killed instantly in the explosion and its immediate aftermath. When morning dawned on January 30th, an appalling toll became clear. The USS Serpens had suffered one of the deadliest maritime disasters of World War II. In a single instant, nearly 250 servicemen lost there. The dead included 197 Coast Guard crew members, almost the entire complement of the ship, and 51 U.S. Army stevedores who had been working alongside them to load. Also killed was Dr. Harry M. Levin, a U.S. Public Health Service physician assigned to the ships. On shore, one Army soldier was killed by flying debris, bringing the total fatalities to roughly. The scale of destruction was almost absolute. Of all those aboard Serpens, only the two men in the bow lived. Only two bodies were found intact in the wreckage that could be identified by. Everyone else had been literally blown to pieces or lost to the sea. The Serpens tragedy stands as the single largest loss of life in U.S. Coast Guard and one of the worst non-combat disasters to strike American forces in the entire war. In the explosion's aftermath, there were more questions than answers. Had a Japanese submarine lurking offshore torpedoed the Serpens? Some who witnessed the double flash thought it might have been an enemy attack. In fact, the initial Navy communique to next of kin reported that the ship was lost as a result of enemy action, implying a hostile. But this was wartime rumor and assumption. There were no reports of an enemy sub in the immediate area that night. A formal court of inquiry convened to investigate the incident, sifting through the scant evidence that remained. Ultimately, the Navy could not find any indication of Japanese. There were no torpedo hits, no enemy shells. The destruction originated from within the ship. By 1949, the Navy officially concluded that the cause of the explosion could not be determined from the available evidence, and it was deemed likely an accident intrinsic to the loading process. In other words, something went tragically wrong as the crew handled the depth charges, a mishap that sparked the catastrophic blast. The exact trigger remains unknown. Perhaps a winch dropped a 350-pound depth bomb, or an electrical short ignited fumes. Whatever the case, the Serpens was destroyed by the very cargo she was carrying. There was no foe to blame, only the terrible risk that comes with hauling munitions in war. This finding had somber implications. Because the loss was classified as non-combat, most of the fallen crewmen were not eligible for the Purple Heart, though the two survivors and Dr. Levin received them when enemy action was initially assumed. It was a cruel technicality. These men died in service to their country just as surely as if they'd been attacked, yet their sacrifice went largely unheralded. The war moved on, and the Serpens disaster, shrouded in confusion and minimal publicity, soon faded into the background of history. For the comrades and families of the men, however, the aftermath was deeply personal. The remains of the Serpens crew were initially gathered and buried in a temporary military cemetery on Guadalcanal with full rows of simple graves marked the resting place of 250 men who, moments before 11:18 p.m. on January 29, 1945, had been alive and full of youth. Back home, telegrams and letters delivered the heartbreaking news to mothers, fathers, wives, and children. One of those who perished was Fireman Second Class Gerald C. Breen, 29, a Coast Guardsman from Boston. In letters written just weeks earlier, Breen had told his family that life on the Serpens was good, surprisingly comfortable for a ship at war. They ate like kings because it was a supply ship, like Thanksgiving dinner every Sunday, he wrote happily, mentioning even the luxury of bathtubs. Now those letters were all that remained of him. Dozens of other young Coast Guardsmen and Army stevedores shared similar fates, their personal dreams and plans obliterated in an instant. Each name on the casualty list represents a story. Dr. Harry Levin, the ship's doctor who left behind a wife and child. Seaman apprentice William Fisher, who had celebrated his 20th birthday at sea just days before. Private Felipe Ravu, one of the Fijian laborers attached to the U.S. Army, who had traveled far from his village to help the Allied. The list went on and on. Nearly 250 lives snuffed out in a flash. In June 1949, over 4 years after the explosion, the remains of the Serpens crew were brought home to U.S. soil. What little could be recovered, in many cases only fragments and intermingled ashes, had been painstakingly gathered into 52 flag-draped. On June 15, 1949, a solemn ceremony was held at Arlington National Cemetery. Under gray skies, with a Coast Guard band playing funeral hymns, the caskets were lowered into 28 graves in Section 34, a collective burial for the men of the. Some 1,500 people attended the service, including grieving relatives and high-ranking military. 3 clergymen, Catholic, Protestant, and Jewish, presided, reflecting the varied faiths of the fallen. A rifle volley cracked out in salute, and buglers played taps, the haunting notes echoing among the headstones. In that hallowed ground, the men of the Serpens joined the ranks of American war dead honored on home soil. The following year, the USS Serpens Memorial was unveiled at the gravesite, a 4-foot-tall octagonal granite monument inscribed with all 250 names, arranged in neat. At the dedication ceremony on November 16, 1950, Vice Admiral Merlin O'Neill, Commandant of the Coast Guard, spoke in tribute. "We cannot undo the past, but we can ensure that these men shall be respected and honored forever." O'Neill. Those words became the ethos of the Serpens story, a promise that although these lives were cut short, they would not be forgotten. Yet, as the 1950s wore on, the nation moved into a new era and new conflicts. The Korean War, the Cold War. Histories will turn, and the tragedy of the Serpens slipped quietly out of the spotlight. In time, it became a little-known footnote of World War II, remembered chiefly by the Coast Guard community and the families who still cherish the memory of their lost sons and husbands. The Pacific Ocean, however, kept its own memory of that night. Down in the depths off Guadalcanal, the physical remains of USS Serpens still rested exactly where they sank, untouched and unseen by human eyes for decades. The Navy had not salvaged the wreck due to its complete destruction and the dangerous munitions scattered around, so the broken hull stayed on the seabed, gradually being enveloped by sand and marine life. Local Solomon Islanders and divers in the 1970s knew of a wreck in that area, but it was often misidentified. Many assumed the debris off Lunga Point came from a different ship, the USS Seminole, another vessel sunk in the war. The Serpens' true grave remained somewhat anonymous beneath the waves. Not until the 1990s was the site properly identified. In 1994, undersea explorer Ewan Stevenson dived on the wreck and confirmed that the upside-down bow section and surrounding debris field was indeed USS. Nearly half a century after the explosion, the ship's remains finally had a name and place on the map of war wrecks. Now, in the present day, an expedition has returned to this long-lost wreck, using advanced robotic technology to document and honor what lies below. The camera on the ROV pans slowly across the seabed. In the murky water, a shape emerges. The inverted bow of the Serpens rises from the sand like the shell of a fallen giant. The hull steel plating is coated in coral and algae, giving it the appearance of a reef. Fish dart in and out of jagged holes torn in the metal. As the ROV glides alongside the wreck, we see the name Serpens barely discernible in raised letters on the bow's flank, now obscured by 80 years of marine growth and crustaceans. The bow is upside down, keel facing upward, testament to the violent manner in which it plunged to the ship's once sharp forepeak is crumpled from impact with the ocean floor. Along the keel, the islets that once anchored anti-submarine netting or mooring lines now serve as artificial coral stacks, teeming with small fish and invertebrates. The scene is one of quiet desolation and eerie beauty, a war grave slowly being reclaimed by the sea. Moving the ROV's spotlight into a gash in the hull, we peer inside the wreck. Here, protected from strong currents, interior spaces have remained eerily preserved. The beam illuminates what was once a corridor running through the bow. Now it lies on its side, encrusted with silt. Frozen corridors is an apt description. The passageways are silent and still, seemingly frozen in time since 1945. There are bulkhead doors half open, leading into compartments filled with sediment. A mirror, tarnished and cracked, clings to one wall, reflecting nothing but darkness. Overhead, which is now underfoot due to the inversion, a row of light fixtures and electrical conduits hang like stalactites. Everything is coated in a fine layer of mud. It is as if the ship's interior has been in a deep freeze undersea, untouched, undisturbed, and utterly silent. On the seafloor around the wreck, the evidence of the ship's explosive cargo is still visible. The ROV's camera finds a large cylindrical object lying half buried in sand, an unexploded depth charge, rusted but recognizable. It's one of the very weapons Serpens was loading that fateful night. The round metal drum, perhaps 3 feet long, is covered in marine incrustation, but the stencil of faded lettering can just be made out on its side. Depth bomb, 6 Malawian kwaches. This depth charge, and possibly others scattered nearby, never detonated. Instead, it sank to the bottom amid the wreckage, where it has lain for decades as a dormant reminder of the ship's deadly cargo. Nearby, the ROV passes over what looks like a torpedo casing, likely a naval torpedo or a large bomb that was part of Serpens' ordnance manifest. Its warhead is gone, probably detonated or separated in the blast, but the long cylindrical body remains, now home to a colony of starfish. Crates are also discernible on the seabed, the wooden slats long ago devoured by marine organisms, but their shapes defined by lines of corroded metal straps and nails. One crate holds a cache of shells or artillery rounds, stacked neatly as they were in 1945. The explosive filler is inert now after years underwater, but the brass casings and steel projectiles lie in a pile, astonishingly preserved. Another broken crate has spilled its contents into the sand. Rifles or carbine barrels can be seen, corroded into a mass, but still identifiable as weapons. It appears not only ammunition, but other military stores were on board and now litter the seabed around the wreck. The ROV's manipulator arm gently pushes aside some silt on a flat object, revealing a helm wheel, likely from the ship's bridge or steering mechanism, hurled far from its original location. Scanning across the debris field, we spot something poignant, a porcelain bathtub, lying at an odd angle among bent metal beams. The tub, once gleaming white, is now stained green and brown by algae, but it remains intact, a lonely domestic artifact in this undersea grave. This tub echoes Fireman Breen's letter about the Serpens crew enjoying hot baths. Here one of those very bathtubs rests, improbably preserved on the ocean floor. It is a silent testament to the everyday life that once existed on the ship. Sailors who scrubbed off the salt and sweat in this tub, laughing and unwinding after long shifts, never imagining the fate that would befall them. The ROV lights play over a jumble of personal effects mingled with the ship's hardware. We see a shoe, its leather mostly gone but the sole and metal eyelets remaining, laced with fronds of seaweed, perhaps a work boot of one of the stevedores. Not far away lies a steel helmet, dented and missing its liner, now serving as a miniature reef bowl for tiny fish. A ceramic mug with a faded Navy anchor insignia is wedged into a corner of twisted bulkhead. A crack in it allows a small eel to peek out. These humble items humanize the wreck, reminders that this was once a floating community of flesh and blood men. One particularly haunting sight is a set of dog tags draped on a piece of grating. The metal tags are heavily corroded, coated in brown rust and salt. The name and serial number on them are barely legible now, consumed by the sea. Perhaps they belonged to a Coast Guardsman who was off duty in his bunk when the explosion struck. In this watery tomb, there's no gravestone with his name, only these corroded tags bearing silent witness to his presence. The camera lingers on the dog tags, a stark symbol of a life cut short. It's as if the ocean floor itself has created a memorial, arranging these personal tokens among the wreckage for us to find decades later. As the ROV explores deeper into a torn section of the bow, it enters what was once the forward cargo hold. Here we find dozens of unused bombs, lying as if carefully placed by a giant hand. These bombs are cylindrical, pointed at one end, aerial bombs that never made it to their destinations. They are coated in barnacles. Some are partially buried. Incredibly, these munitions, unfused and unused, have slept here for 80 years. They are untouched munitions in the truest sense, their triggers never activated, their deadly payloads still inside. They pose no immediate threat now. The salt water will have deadened their explosives, but they are a chilling sight. Each bomb was meant to be dropped on an enemy target, but instead they became part of the Serpens' own funeral pyre, or escaped it to lie unused in the depths. Carefully maneuvering, the ROV's camera illuminates one bomb's tail fins. The stenciled lettering Torpex 350LB is just. One can only marvel at the unstable power that a single spark unleashed among these hundreds of bombs on that fateful night. Throughout the wreck site, contrast abounds. The violence of the ship's end is evident in every mangled beam and exploded fragment. Yet now all is profoundly quiet. The only sounds are the ROV's gentle whir and the distant clicks of shrimp in the reef. It's a world of paradox, the noise of war versus the silence of the deep. In 1945, the Serpens died in a cacophony of thunder. Today, her remains lie in eternal hush. Sunlight never penetrates this far down. The wreck exists in a state of perpetual twilight. As the submersible's lights roam over a section of deck plating, we catch sight of the outline of a five-pointed star still visible on the metal, the faded white star that once marked an American vessel. It sends a jolt of recognition through the viewers above. This chunk of steel, now home to anemones, was part of the Serpens' hull, proudly bearing the symbol of the United States. Now it rests apart, a relic both of national history and personal tragedy. In the mind's eye, it's easy to imagine this wreck reanimated, to hear the echo of boots on that corridor floor, or laughter in the mess hall, or the clang of ammunition being loaded in the hold. The psychological drama of this place is almost palpable. We sense the spirits of the 250 men who met their end here. It's as if time stopped at 11:18 p.m. on January 29, 1945, and the wreck has been frozen in that final moment ever since. The deep sea, in its cold embrace, has preserved the truth of what happened, even as human memory of the event faded over the years. Every twisted girder and unfired shell is a piece of evidence, a testament that this tragedy was real. Above water, the world might forget, but down here the reality remains written in steel. After meticulous surveying, the ROV backs away and begins its ascent. The camera pulls out for a final wide shot of the Serpens' bow resting on the ocean floor. In that frame, we see the full tableau of the wreck in its loneliness. The once proud cargo ship's front section lies as a broken shell, its torn edges silhouetted against the dark water. Surrounding it is a field of debris extending in all directions, the graveyard of a ship and her crew. The lights of the submersible fade, and darkness encroaches once more on the wreck. Above, on the surface, the research vessel's crew retrieve the ROV and begins to catalog the findings. But in those moments underwater, we have witnessed something profound, a journey back in time and into oblivion. We have seen how a single violent moment can reverberate through decades, how the ocean's depths became a vault for secrets and sorrows. On the shores of Guadalcanal today, few signs remain of the war that once raged there. Tourists and locals stroll the beaches. Waves lap peacefully where once the thunder of artillery boomed. If you didn't know, you might never guess that just offshore lie the remains of dozens of ships, including the Serpens, in what is aptly nicknamed Iron Bottom Sound. But now we do know. Thanks to exploration and remembrance, the Serpens' story has resurfaced. The ship's destruction, once forgotten, is being retold to new generations. The tragedy of USS Serpens is a stark reminder of the hidden costs of war. Not all sacrifices happen in fiery battle with the enemy. Some occur in the quiet, routine tasks that keep the war machine running, like loading ammunition on a calm night in a supposedly safe harbor. The men of the Serpens gave their lives not in combat but in service, doing an essential yet perilous job. Their loss, the largest in Coast Guard, underscores the fact that danger in war often lies just as much in logistics as in frontline fighting. A ship carrying thousands of tons of explosives can be as much a tinderbox as a warship under fire. As the documentary draws to a close, we shift from the underwater imagery to archival photos and the Arlington Memorial. We see the octagonal granite monument at Arlington, inscribed with 250 names, among them Gerald C. Breen, Harry M. Levin, Kelsey K. Kemp. Kemp, the survivor, lived until 2015 and passed away at age He carried the memory of that night all his life. The other names etched in stone never had the chance to grow old. Their story could have been lost to time, but the deep ocean kept its record, and historians and families kept theirs. Now their story is told once more, merging the cold facts of military history with the human emotion of lives interrupted. In the rusting steel of the Serpens wreck, we find not just a ship's remains, but a time capsule of truth and memory. The camera slowly pans over the serene expanse of the Pacific, where the Serpens went down. The waves glint under the sun, indifferent, eternal. A sense of closure, yet also continuity, pervades the scene. The war ended long ago, the guns fell silent, but the silence below has remained, guarding the truth of that night until we were ready to find it. In that silence, there is a lesson, that sacrifice and valor do not vanish even when they slip from headlines. History may bury some stories in obscurity, like a shipwreck lost in the dark, but given time, those stories can surface again. The image of the wreck and the roll call of names invite us to reflect on the fragility of life in wartime and the duty of remembrance in peacetime. With a final, respectful look at the list of names on the Arlington Memorial and a final sonar image of the wreck on the seafloor, the narration concludes softly. Time does not bury the truth. It waits in the silence,